Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC Singapore, which goes down very early on Saturday morning. Like I said, that early start time out in Asia, it's 10 a.m. UK time, 5 a.m. Eastern time. The rest of the time zones, I'm sure you can work out yourself. But yeah, it's an early start, so make sure you're up nice and early. You've got that breakfast ready for breakfast and fights. And it's headlined by Max Holloway versus the Korean Zombie Chan Sung Jung, which, again, in the featherweight division, it's a fight that I feel at this point has to happen. But like I say, it's a headline that's definitely geared more towards that Asian fan base and getting people to tune into the event. Just before we get into the breakdowns, though, as always, there's going to be a Base AI recap from our UFC prediction software from last weekend's event at UFC 292, which includes an absolute solid gem as well. So make sure you check that out if you are interested in AI and in AI for UFC and MMA. But let's get right to it. Let's get into the breakdowns. The main event in the featherweight division, Max Holloway versus the Korean Zombie Chan Sung Jung. And it's, like I said in the introduction, it's a fight that I feel, just has to be made for this event. The Korean Zombie is always the first choice to headline an Asian event just because of the amount of eyes that he brings into the sport from that side of the world. Of course, he's an absolute legend of a fighter, not just in the UFC, but in MMA as well. And a real fan favourite, a real fun fighter. He's called the Korean Zombie for a reason because he can walk through those punches just to land his own and make fights exciting. But this is, in my opinion, a horrific fight for him. I think, you look at the betting lines, Max Holloway is a huge favourite, and you can understand why. Chan Sung Jung, the Korean Zombie, he is declining. He's closer to the end of his career than he is his prime, in my opinion. And Max Holloway, he's still as good as what he has been over the last few years. There's no obvious signs of decline for Holloway. And the thing is with the Korean Zombie, he's got a real good BJJ game, a real good grappling game, but the wrestling is okay as well. However, the reason I use the word but is because Max Holloway's takedown defense is almost godlike. If he is taken down, he gets straight back up to his feet. So the wrestling and the grappling game plan from the Korean Zombie just, in my opinion, is not going to be there at all. He's going to be forced to stand and strike with Holloway. And Holloway's just too good. His volume's insane. I think he landed, over 400 strikes in the Calvin Kattar fight. So that's the type of fighter that Holloway is. 5 rounds is Holloway's game as well. That's where he's, been an amazing dominant fighter over the last few years in the UFC. He can fight in round 5 with the same pace and intensity that he fights in round 1. So you're looking at the type of path to victory that the Korean Zombie's got in this fight, and it is just a puncher's chance, it seems, which, to be fair, as I always say, 4-ounce gloves at this level in the UFC, it only takes one punch. Look at, Sean O'Malley and Aljamain Sterling last week. I'm not saying that, O'Malley's got no power or anything, because he clearly has, but what I'm saying is one punch can change a fight. So that's the path to victory for the Korean Zombie. But then you look at Holloway's durability. The dude is insanely durable, so knocking him out or even dropping him is probably, it's not out the question, but it's a very low percentage probability. So how I see this fight playing out, which I assume that any person that is breaking down fights that has got any sort of decent analysis within the skill set when it comes to MMA is probably going to be breaking it down the exact same way. Holloway's just going to land a ton of volume. He's just going to piece the Korean Zombie up with the boxing, maybe add a few kicks in there. He does, of course, like I've said, have to mind his P's and Q's just like any fighter, but Holloway's an elite fighter. He knows he's going to have to mind his P's and Q's, and I just see him, racking up a ton of volume on the Korean Zombie, really busting him up, and it's either going to be a finish, maybe not, I wouldn't say an early finish because Holloway doesn't really have that one-hitter-quitter type of power, but I think it'll be a finish either start to mid-fight or maybe mid to late, or if he doesn't get that finish, it'll just be a comfortable decision for Holloway. I really, really don't see him losing this fight at all. So for those reasons, I'm picking Max Holloway to win this fight. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, this is actually a rematch. We've got Anthony Smith versus Ryan Spann 2. And it's actually crazy that this initial fight, the first time that these two fought, was almost 2 years ago. It only feels like it was 2 months ago. So look, the UFC have rematched this fight. I'm not 100% sure why. I don't hate the rematch though. I think it's interesting, especially considering how the fight played out last time. So the initial fight was a main event. It ended in round 1 with Anthony Smith winning by submission. But Ryan Spann was looking okay until he hit the mat. And again, he was looking all right, but then he made a couple of mistakes. And I kind of put Ryan Spann in a very similar category to Nikita Krylov in regards to he's got a really good submission game, but he can make some really, really bad errors and unforced mistakes on the mat to then put himself in a compromised position. So I've said this, look, if you've listened to me in these breakdowns for years, you'll have heard me say this about Krylov so many times, that he's such a good grappler, but so liable to make a mistake and an unforced error. And I think Ryan Spann's in a very similar position as what Krylov is, although I think Krylov's actually slowly coming out of that mistake and error liability, and I'm not sure that Ryan Spann's quite there yet. So it's a bit of an interesting one, this rematch, because I do think that Ryan Spann is going to be the more dangerous striker for sure. He's huge, he's physical, he's athletic, he's got power, and he could definitely knock Anthony Smith out on the feet. Smith's a veteran though, and Smith's a good striker himself. I do think that he's going to be competitive with Ryan Spann if it's on the feet. And, you know, if you're looking at a fight that goes 3 rounds and, you know, the majority of the action has taken place on the feet, then Anthony Smith, I think, would be in a very good position to win that decision. You know, he's more that type of fighter. But again, with Ryan Spann, if the fight hits the mat, does he make some mistakes? Does he lock up a guillotine or a front choke? That seems to be his specialty. And Anthony Smith's a good BJJ black belt, so, you know, he's very savvy down there on the mat as well. It's just one of those fights that's really difficult to predict what's going to happen. But I do feel myself being pulled more to Ryan Spann again and again. I know that he's prone for a mistake. I know he's liable to make a mistake on the mat within the jiu-jitsu, and that's not necessarily always his fault. You know, if he fights another good grappler, they can bait him in and force those mistakes from him at times. But some, like I say, are unforced. I do feel myself leaning to Ryan Spann just because of, you know, the height, the length, the reach, the power, the athleticism. He's younger than Anthony Smith as well, and he does have a dangerous submission game. If you can get past the submission game and get on top of him, then, you know, Anthony Smith could potentially submit him again. But like I say, it's tough to look past the age, the physicality, the height, the reach, the power, the athleticism. So yeah, it's a really difficult fight to predict and be confident on an outcome, but I am siding with Spann, so I'm picking Ryan Spann to win this fight. And in the next fight, this should be a fun one. We've got Giga Chikadze versus Alex Bruce Leroy Caceres. Now, I'm pretty sure this fight was booked a few years ago as well, fell through, and both went in different directions. But the UFC have brought them back together for this event. So it's definitely been a fight I think that's been on the UFC's radar for a while. But like I say, they both went in different directions. Now, for Alex Caceres, this is a massive step up in competition for Giga to fight Giga Chikadze. And for Giga Chikadze, it's a step down in competition since he lost last time out against Calvin Kattar. Now, normally in this type of fight, I do feel that they're meeting each other at the right time. Caceres deserves the step up. Giga Chikadze, you know, deserves the step down, especially after, you know, climbing some heights. But I don't fully agree with it this time. I do feel that both of them could have had slightly better opponents, more suited for where they are right now. And I know the UFC have tried to book Giga Chikadze 3 times now. I think twice was Sadiq Youssef. I don't remember who the other fighter was that they tried to book him with, but again, it was another top fighter. So Giga Chikadze has now got a huge step down in competition to what he was, or what the UFC was initially trying to book him against. So from a striking perspective, it's a really interesting one, because Alex Caceres is absolutely not the better quality striker. The better quality striker is Giga Chikadze. He's got a kickboxing background. He's going to be much sharper, much more powerful, much more accurate with his attacks. He'll switch stances much better than Alex Caceres in regards to being able to fire from both stances and being able to defend from both stances as well. But what Alex Caceres has got on his side is he's got unorthodox movement, he's got some good speed as well. So Giga Chikadze has really got to be patient in this fight. And I feel the way Alex Caceres wins is if he just frustrates Chikadze isn't there for Chikadze to hit him, and rather than Chikadze starting to build his way into the fight, make reads, cut him off, cut the cage, and start to land his own strikes, if Chikadze isn't patient and doesn't do that and starts trying to force the issue, I do think Caceres will be able to take a round, maybe 2 rounds, and then it'd be a really close decision. But ultimately, I do think the fight is going to be won and lost on the feet. If there is any wrestling, I do expect it to be more from Alex Caceres' side, although Chikadze's got decent defensive wrestling, and naturally a lot of fighters that he's fought have tried to take him down, and you can get him down, but again, it's not easy. And he's also got a decent get-up game as well, so it's also not that easy to keep him down either. Chikadze's not one of these strikers that's a complete fish out of water on the mat. He's got some good anti-wrestling, good defensive grappling as well. So I do think the majority of the fight is going to play out on the feet. The bigger action moments is going to be on the feet. And I think the early moments of this fight might be quite close. But I do think Chikadze is smart enough here not to force anything, not to rush, not to make or get himself frustrated, because he is clearly the better quality striker. So with Alex Caceres, like I said, I think he'll make the early moments of this fight close. The other thing is as well, Caceres can really drop off a little bit the longer the fights go on. When you get into the 3rd round, you can start to get at him a little bit. We've seen that in multiple fights. And Giga Chikadze is a fighter that's been in there with Edson Barboza, stood with him and knocked him out in 3 rounds as well, although it was a scheduled 5-round fight, I believe. So Giga Chikadze has beaten much better quality strikers than Alex Caceres, strikers that are more dangerous than Caceres. And here I do think the step down in competition is going to suit Giga Chikadze, getting back in the cage after the layoff and getting back on a win streak. So for those reasons, I'm picking Giga Chikadze to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Rinya Nakamura versus Fernie Garcia. A real stylistic clash here. Rinya Nakamura, of course, with the wrestling background. Fernie Garcia with the boxing background. And I just think that this is a little bit of a process for the UFC with Rinya Nakamura. I think that he's having to have these sort of fights. And listen, I'm not saying anything negative about Fernie Garcia as a fighter. I think that he's a fighter that's going to win plenty of fights in the UFC. I think he's going to be a fighter that's in the UFC for a very long time as well. Although having said that, he is on a 2-fight losing streak, so maybe a 3-fight losing streak and the UFC make a decision. I really hope not, because I think it'd be unfair to cut Fernie Garcia or any fighter off a loss against Rinya Nakamura just because he's a solid fighter. But stylistically, it's not really a good fight for Garcia. Even Nakamura's striking, so I don't think he's going to be as active as a striker as Garcia. I don't think he's going to be as technical as a striker as Garcia, but Nakamura still packs a punch. He can still hurt his opponent. He can still land on them, knock them out. But it all seems to be a means to the wrestling. And that's where the biggest gap in skill is in this fight, because once Nakamura starts wrestling, of course, if he doesn't knock Fernie Garcia out early or vice versa, I do think the wrestling is going to get going in this fight. And that's where I think Garcia is going to get completely blown out the water. And that's where the fight's a bad stylistic one for him. If this is a 15-minute kickboxing fight, then Nakamura gets a good puncher's chance, probably an elevated puncher's chance than your regular puncher's chance, but Garcia would piece him up, I think, over those 3 rounds if it was a 15-minute kickboxing fight, but it's not, it's MMA, and Nakamura, even if he goes out there and tests his striking and it's not quite working for him, he'll just revert to plan A, which is always the wrestling, and that's where his background is. And it's just going to be a tough fight, I think, for Garcia. Maybe Garcia gets up once or twice early on, maybe defends a takedown or 2, but Nakamura's chain wrestling will be there. His wrestling will eventually get to Garcia, and even if Garcia does get up that couple of times that I mentioned, I think if Nakamura turns relentless, which he's got the ability and the cardio to do that, I think Garcia will just keep getting dumped and dumped and dumped, and the more times that he ends up on his back, the less likely it is that he's going to get back up to his feet. So yeah, I think it's a tough fight for Fernie Garcia, a fighter that's got some quality about him, and I actually think when all is said and done, Fernie Garcia is the better quality striker. I just feel the fight is going to be dictated by Nakamura and therefore won and lost with the wrestling and the grappling. So for those reasons, I'm picking Rinya Nakamura to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a fight that I think should be the co-main event, if I'm being honest. And it could probably headline a fight night, and I'm pretty sure it was due to headline a fight night just a few months ago. We've got Erin Blanchfield versus Taila Santos, and this is a really, really good fight. I can't remember whether I eventually got to breaking this fight down or whether the fight got cancelled before I got to the breakdown. I'm not too sure, but my prediction and my breakdown doesn't actually change from what I either broke it down before saying or what I was about to. I actually think, look, Erin Blanchfield, I really like Blanchfield. I think she's a future UFC champion. I think she's a future superstar, a legit fighter. And the 2 times that she's been an underdog in the UFC, I've been on her, I've bet her, I've cashed her as an underdog. I love Erin Blanchfield. I just feel that, of course, styles make fights. We know that. And I kind of feel that Taila Santos might be a difficult fight for Blanchfield. Look, I know Blanchfield ran through Jessica Andrade. Blanchfield's striking looked a lot better than Andrade's as well. But with Taila Santos also has a very good striking game. She's also got a very good wrestling game, and she's also a legit BJJ black belt as well. So I kind of think that this is a really, really well-matched fight. And even if you go back to the Taila Santos and Shevchenko fight, in my opinion, I think that Taila Santos was comfortably on her way to winning that fight until the injury, and then it all changed. She is a solid fighter wherever the fight goes. And I think when Blanchfield hits a brick wall against a fighter that is good defensively and can match her from a striking, wrestling and a grappling perspective, Blanchfield can look a little bit stuck. Like, look at the JJ Aldrich fight, for example. You know, Blanchfield went in there. In my opinion, she was the better wrestler. She's the better grappler. Maybe not the better striker at the time, but JJ Aldrich was looking pretty good against Erin Blanchfield, and Blanchfield found that standing guillotine, high elbow guillotine, and finished the fight. Whereas I just don't see that happening to someone like Santos. I think Santos's striking's dangerous. She's got good power. Like I say, with the wrestling, if Blanchfield does take Santos down, Blanchfield might have some success on top, but until I see Blanchfield against another absolute legit black belt, I'm just not I'm not sure. I was going to say convinced, but I'm just not sure how much success she'll have on Santos. Like, look, if Blanchfield goes into this fight, takes Santos down, absolutely rolls on her, slices through her on the mat, then holy shit, like, we're in for a real treat with Blanchfield. But until I see that against someone at the level of Santos, it's just hard for me to predict that that's going to happen, if that makes sense. And like I say, with the striking, I know Blanchfield's made strides, made improvements, but I think Taila Santos is the better striker at this point. And look, if Santos takes Blanchfield down, again, there's a little bit of an unknown there, because does Blanchfield get back up to her feet? Does she submit from bottom, or does Santos smother her on top? So with all that being said, look, I've seen Santos perform at the higher level against somebody like Shevchenko. I know she's dangerous striking. I know she's a decent wrestler. I know she's a good grappler. And that's where I'm leaning with this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Taila Santos to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the big boys. We've got Junior Tafa versus Parker Porter. Parker Porter, he's had one Tafa before. He's now got the other Tafa. Of course, he's fought Justin Tafa, the older brother of Junior Tafa, and now he's got the younger brother. Junior Tafa's brother, Justin, was the one that knocked Parker Porter out in the first round. So can Junior Tafa replicate what Justin did? And it's an interesting fight. Look, I don't think Tafa overly impressed against Muhammad Usman in his UFC debut. And Tafa is still relatively inexperienced at 4-1. And I think that showed against Muhammad Usman, who's just fought a better level of competition. Tafa looked good in moments, but once Usman's wrestling and grappling started, Tafa did look completely lost on his back. And this is where Parker Porter's got a path to victory in this fight, for sure, because Parker Porter, in my opinion, is going to be the better wrestler, and also, more importantly, the more likely to engage in the wrestling. And I think Porter's going to be the better grappler if he gets on top of Tafa as well. So there's a path to victory for Porter. The problem I've got with Parker Porter is trusting him to run that path to victory. I know he was knocked out early against Justin Tafa, but there was a path to victory, the same path to victory that he's got here against Junior, he had against Justin, and he didn't even, like I said, I know it was early, but he didn't even look like he had that game plan. Now, when you've got that type of advantage, you want to see the fighter go out there and just straight away just actively look for a takedown. Why mess around striking when you know there's a path to victory? Jab or double jab your way into range and just pin your opponent against the cage and start to work the takedown where you've got the advantages. And Porter just doesn't seem to do that. Now, if he does that against Tafa, I think that Porter's got every chance of winning this fight. But on the feet, striking, I think Tafa's got a huge power advantage. He's got a huge speed advantage, a huge movement advantage. And even if Porter does want to Parker Porter does want to try and double jab his way in and close the distance, it's going to be more difficult against Junior than it is Justin, because I think Junior moves a little bit better and is a little bit faster, but still holds that same power. So I actually think this is a slightly worse fight for Parker Porter than it was against Junior's brother. And I do think that, look, I just don't trust Porter to go out there and just wrestle early and make the fight as comfortable as possible for himself. I think Tafa's going to have moments on the feet striking, and I do think those moments are going to get to Porter. And again, I think he's going to land on Porter and knock him out. So for those reasons, I'm picking Junior Tafa to win this fight. And next up, we've got some more big boys. We've got Waldo Cortes-Acosta versus Lukasz Brzeski. And again, you look at, I've just said it with Junior Tafa, you look at the speed, movement, light on the feet, good striking, and that all describes Cortes-Acosta. Now, Cortes-Acosta's last fight against Marcos Rogerio de Lima, I bet de Lima in that fight. I was really high on de Lima against Cortes-Acosta. I just think this is a big step down in competition from someone like de Lima, someone that's slightly less, or a lot less dangerous as well, in regards to, de Lima had heavy legs, but he had heavy punches and aggression. And look, Lukasz Brzeski is a decent fighter, but I kind of feel, again, he's going to be very similar to Waldo Cortes-Acosta in the UFC heavyweight division in regards to not being the biggest, heaviest, flat-footed guy. He does have decent movement and he's got decent speed himself. It's just, I kind of think that Cortes-Acosta is going to be slightly faster, a slightly better mover. I think he mixes things up really well as well. And the fact that he not walked through, but was able to absorb all those strikes against de Lima and still come on strong towards the end of the fight against Lima shows that Cortes-Acosta's got durability up and down the body as well. He's really, starting to build himself in the division somewhat. And I still think Lukasz Brzeski's got things to prove in the UFC. I still think that he's got to get a couple of those back-to-back wins together, maybe against someone lower level than Cortes-Acosta. I don't think they're horrifically matched up, but I do think Cortes-Acosta is going to be slightly better in the areas that matter, which is going to be within the striking. I think the fight's won and lost on the feet. And like I said, I think Cortes-Acosta's got slightly better volume, hits slightly harder, moves slightly better, is slightly faster, and will put combinations together, mixing up and down the body as well. And he's probably a slightly more varied striker in regards to mixing kicks in also. So for those reasons, I'm picking Waldo Cortes-Acosta to win this fight. Next up, we've got Toshiomi Kazama versus Garrett Armfield. And it's an interesting fight here because Kazama is more of a grappler, submission artist than he is a striker. I mean, of course he can strike as well, but he does prefer to be close to his opponent, close the distance, get them down, move on top, transition and control positions and all that fun stuff when it comes to the grappling. Garrett Armfield, though, is not too dissimilar. I think he's a more well-rounded fighter than Kazama, so I think he's a better striker. But Armfield also has decent wrestling. He's got decent grappling himself as well. And even if Armfield is taken down, we saw on short notice in the UFC, he can reverse positions and he can scramble and explode, and it's not very easy to keep him down. And this is where I think it's going to be a difficult fight for Kazama, because let's say hypothetically Kazama does take Garrett Armfield down. How long does he keep him down for? I wouldn't imagine too long. Does he submit him? I'd be surprised. I think Armfield's more likely to sweep from bottom to get on top than Kazama is to sweep from bottom to get on top if Armfield takes him down. And then when you do look at the wrestling between both fighters, I think Armfield's the better wrestler. Then when you look at the striking, I think Armfield's the better striker. So where Kazama is going to be best in this fight is on top of Armfield. But if his wrestling isn't as good as Armfield's, that's going to be difficult. Or if there's a slip and Kazama gets on top, or even if Kazama does get a takedown at Armfield, that's not out of the question. It's, does Kazama submit or hold Armfield down enough to be able to win the fight? And I just don't think he has the ability to keep him down for long periods. And a submission is always possible, if Armfield makes a mistake, I suppose. But again, it's not an outcome that I'm anticipating being a high probability. Like I said, I think Armfield's the better mixed martial artist. He's better in more areas. And the area where Kazama's strongest, Armfield's got good defense in. So for those reasons, I'm picking Garrett Armfield to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Chidi and Njokuani versus Michal Oleksiejczuk. And this fight shouldn't be this low down on the card. I think this has got main card written all over it. It should be much higher up, but we get it nice and early on the prelims. And it's a really good fight, a really well-matched fight. I think both fighters are going to be absolutely appreciative and thankful that the UFC have matched them together with an opponent that isn't going to be predominantly trying to take them down. Of course, Chidi and Njokuani lost last time out. He was taken down twice. When he was taken down, he struggled to get back up, and I kind of feel that he was overly concerned and therefore way too hesitant to strike on the feet because of the wrestling of Joraev. Whereas Michal Oleksiejczuk, he's just come off of a fight against Caio Barraio, who Caio Barraio is a really good wrestler and a really good grappler, a really dangerous grappler. So, you know, Michal Oleksiejczuk wanted to strike last fight, Chidi wanted to strike last fight, and both fighters lost because, again, they were fighting an opponent that wanted to take them down. So I do think that this fight is, like I say, going to be really favourable to both fighters because they can just come out there, they can stand, they can strike. So when you're looking at the striking differences between them, Chidi Njokuani is more of a kickboxer, Muay Thai style, doesn't move too much, but will implement elbows, knees in the clinch, whereas Oleksiejczuk seems to be purely a boxer. He doesn't really kick too much. He doesn't really like to spend too much time in the clinch, even though a lot of his fights striking do end up clinch based, but you know, he does prefer to be in that boxing range where he can rip punches to the body, to the head, and he is really dangerous there. And that's one thing Chidi Njokuani's got to watch out for in this fight, because the hooks to the body, worst case, it slows Chidi Njokuani down, tires him out a little bit quicker. Best case, a body shot finds the liver and drops Chidi Njokuani, and Michal Oleksiejczuk finishes the fight. But on the flip side, I think Njokuani is going to be better here in more ranges. So in the boxing range, Njokuani's got power with his straight punches. We saw that against Marc-Andre Barriou, who was Barriou is an absolute beast in regards to durability. So the fact Njokuani, dropped him hard the way he did and then finished him early in the fight, he's got power in those straight punches. But then on the outside, Njokuani is going to be taller, he's going to be longer, he's going to have a 6-inch reach advantage, 3-inch height advantage. The leg reach I'm unsure of, but that's got to be absolutely huge. And on the outside, Njokuani can strike inwards and piece Oleksiejczuk up. The boxing range I've already talked about, and then the other range is the clinch. If Oleksiejczuk gets too close, Njokuani will clinch up with him, land knees, land elbows, really devastating knees and elbows as well. So this is where I think the fight's more favourable for Njokuani, because he's got all the physical advantages. I think he's going to be the better striker in more ranges. He's dangerous himself. So look, I know Oleksiejczuk's dangerous, but so's Njokuani. It's a really well-matched fight, but I kind of feel that the small edges, once you start to analyse this fight, start to surface on the side of Njokuani. So for those reasons, I'm picking Chidi Njokuani to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Kenan Song versus Rolando Bedoya. I've seen that Rolando Bedoya is very, very popular amongst the bettors, the MMA gamblers, everybody, and the dog seems to be on Bedoya in this fight. And I kind of get it, like he's got volume, he's big, he's young, and Kenan Song more towards the end of his, I wouldn't say the end of his career, but he's definitely not in his prime anymore. I still think he holds some power. He obviously doesn't have as much volume. The wrestling isn't going to be there for Song. If the striking's not working out, I don't think Song's the type of fighter that's going to take Bedoya down. And even if he does take him down, he's not any sort of like BJJ phenom that's going to be able to keep Bedoya down for long moments in this fight. So I think it's a fight that's ultimately going to be won and lost on the feet striking. Like I said, with Bedoya, he's going to have volume, he's going to have some power, and I think that might ultimately lead to aggression, which if Song's moving backwards, Bedoya's just got to be careful of a counterpunch. And aside from that, Bedoya could really have his way with Kenan Song in this fight. I don't think it's going to be a complete whitewash of a fight. Or maybe it is. I'm really not sure. Look, Bedoya's still got a lot to prove, in my opinion, in the UFC. I'm still a little bit unsure of where his ceiling's at. And because of that, I'm unsure of whether this is a fight that on paper looks like a good fight for him and he makes it harder for himself than it should be, or whether he does exactly what he should do and completely runs through Song, finishes him, knocks him out, and then suddenly everyone's talking about Bedoya. So I'm unsure, because of that uncertainty of where his ceiling's at, how he's going to actually perform in fights where he should win. So yeah, look, it's a fight that I believe that Bedoya is going to win. It's just how good he looks, I'm not too sure. Regardless of that, and also I don't care about the ceiling of where he's going to be at in the UFC, because I just take fights, event by event, fight by fight. And in this specific fight against Kenan Song, I'm picking Rolando Bedoya to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Yusaku Kinoshita versus Billy Goff, the newcomer, the UFC debutant. Now, Kinoshita last time out really shit the bed as a favourite. I don't think there's any better way of putting it. Kinoshita looked great on the regional scene, came into the UFC against Adam Fugit. And look, I'm not going to say anything negative about Adam Fugit. He's a tough fighter, durable, he's gritty, he's grindy, he's good everywhere. He's one of those fighters where if you do, leave any opening or any mistake, Fugit's the type of fighter to capitalise. But with that being said, Fugit's also, in my opinion, not got a ceiling of a fighter that's going to hit the top 15, top 20. So I think it was a fight that Kinoshita should have been winning. And he just looked absolutely terrible. Fugit ended up being able to get takedowns, ground and pound. Kinoshita, I'm not going to say he looked for a way out. He did take a lot of shots on top, but at some point he did stop defending somewhat. And, of course, lost in round 1 against a fighter who he should have been beating. And, in my opinion, a fighter that is not as good as his opponent that's got in front of him. Like Billy Goff, I'm not, super impressed with Billy Goff from what I've seen on the regionals. I'm very open-minded though for that to change my mind. However, I do still think he's a good fighter. He's got decent technical ability with his striking. He's got a wrestling background. He will look for takedowns. He's got decent top control as well. The only knock on Billy Goff that I've got is he can leave himself open to be hit sometimes, and he can be dropped and he can be hurt, but I've also seen him hurt and come back from adversity as well and finish his opponent also after that. So I've seen all the right things from Billy Goff, even though there are some negatives there. But the thing is with Kinoshita, is Kinoshita's striking is probably his most dangerous aspect. So Billy Goff's really got to be careful, because in the UFC, you don't always get dropped and be able to come back and win the fight. More often than not in the UFC at this level, you get dropped and you're either losing the round or getting finished, and then the fight, or if you don't get finished, the fight then changes the course of where it was going. And what I'm saying is it's just much more difficult in the UFC to be let off the hook than it is outside the UFC on the regionals. So Billy Goff's got to keep that in mind. But I do like the wrestling and the topside control of Goff, and I do think his striking is good enough, much good enough to be able to keep up with Kinoshita in regards to being competitive and using the striking to close the distance. I do think Goff needs takedowns and top control time to win the fight, but we saw Fugit take Kinoshita down 4 times and finish him in round 1. So I do think that there's a path to victory there, a solid path to victory for Billy Goff to get the takedown and do some good work on top. Whether he finishes Kinoshita like Fugit, I'm not sure. You can never bank on that, especially with the UFC debutant. But I do think that if Goff can keep that cardio good for 3 rounds, which he looks like he probably can from what I've seen, then the takedown should be able to come for him. If it makes Kinoshita hesitant, then he might look a little bit better moving forwards. But yeah, look, Kinoshita's got every possibility of, capitalising on the defensive flaws that Billy Goff has on the feet in regards to his striking defence and knocking him out. But I am going to be siding with Billy Goff here in regards to just being able to get the takedowns that I've seen Kinoshita succumb to in the UFC already, and then do some good work on top. So for those reasons, I'm picking Billy Goff to win this fight. And next up, we've got Na Liang versus JJ Aldrich. Now, I put a tweet out, or a post if you're looking at calling it X rather than Twitter anymore, but I put a post out on X, shall we say, regarding the betting line. Look, there's still a bookie in the UK that has JJ Aldrich as a minus 1,000 favourite, with the comeback on Na Liang at plus 600. Other bookies have reacted to, what I imagine would be at least blind bets on Na Liang, and then maybe some people have watched tape and still believe that, Na Liang has got more of a chance of winning than what the bookie suggests. And look, that's the correct way to bet. And anybody that has bet Na Liang at like plus 450, plus 500, or if someone got the plus 600, that's a really good bet. Even if you bet it blind, like the minus 1,000s in the MMA game are reserved for your John Joneses, for your Habibs, for your Valentina Shevchenko's. When, Shevchenko was a champion, she was at least a minus 1,000 favourite in most of her fights. Those are the types of fighters that a minus 1,000 line should be reserved for. Now, no disrespect to Aldrich, and I know this really isn't her fault at all. She doesn't, have any sort of influence in the betting lines and where she's lined by the bookies. But again, no disrespect, it's just Aldrich isn't on that elite level of the fighters that I've just mentioned. So I just don't believe that any fighter at Aldrich's level, even though, look, she's a very comfortable UFC caliber fighter, but she's not a minus 1,000 type of fighter. So even the blind bets on Na Liang are good bets. I've watched tape on this. I do think Aldrich is going to win the fight. It's hard to not pick her to win the fight, but there's certainly no value in that betting line. Even when she's down to like minus 700, minus 600, there's still no value there. I think that if Aldrich was lined minus 300, minus 350, I could understand that. Anything greater than that, I just think there's just no value there at all, and the value is going to be on the underdog. Now, in regards to the styles, Aldrich, like I've already said, she's a UFC caliber fighter. She's fought some of the best, and she's a well-rounded fighter, good boxer. She's got decent wrestling, both offensively and defensively, and she's got decent grappling as well. Now, Na Liang is very much, wear your heart on your sleeve type of fighter, if you like. She doesn't hold back. She'll come forward. She'll come hard. She'll strike, but she likes to get into those wrestling and grappling scenarios. She's really good wrestler, decent grappler as well. But from the pure pick prediction perspective, it's hard to see her taking Aldrich down at will. It's hard to see her rolling on her too much on the mat. If she does take Aldrich down, does Aldrich get submitted, or can Aldrich reverse a position? And this is something we've seen lesser opponents than JJ Aldrich do to Na Liang. So Na Liang's been able to take them down, but then she's lost a position, whether she's rushed a transition and been swept or reversed, or whether her opponent's got back up, or, started to get back up, caused a scramble and get on top of Na Liang. So I don't think Na Liang's got the heaviest topside pressure, even though she's got decent wrestling. So I think Na Liang's going to have a moments in this fight, enough moments to make a warrant to, like I say, if you're better at like plus 600, plus 500 or whatever, I do think that she's got enough about her to make the fight, or make the value there on Na Liang inside the cage. The other thing as well is this is a bit of an unknown. I tried to find out where Na Liang's been training, what she's been doing, what she's been up to, and there just seems to be absolutely nothing out on the internet, on social media, or there doesn't seem to be any interviews, at least not when I was, researching this fight. So I've got no idea where she's at, where she's training. If she's gone to like a Team Alpha Male, for example, then I might be more inclined to be more confident in her, because I know her striking will be getting better, I know her wrestling and grappling will be getting better. But if she's still in China and training over there, I'm not saying that, she can't improve over in China. It's just, I don't think the developments will be as rapid as one of the major gyms in the US, is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, there's a bit of an unknown there. If she has been training with the likes of, like I say, Uriah Faber and Yan Xiaonan and Song Yidong and all those guys over at Team Alpha Male, guys and girls over at Team Alpha Male, then yeah, I think you can expect a much, much closer fight. But again, it's an unknown. I have to pick JJ Aldrich here. I know I've gone on a little bit too long here, but I have to pick JJ Aldrich. All the values on Na Liang from a betting perspective, but for a pure pick and a prediction, I'm picking JJ Aldrich to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Sung Woo Choi versus Jarno Errens. Now, I went into tape really, really wanting to like Jarno Errens a lot. 2-1 underdog against Sung Woo Choi, who seems to really have falling off a cliff, especially with his durability. He's going in there, he's getting dropped, he's getting hurt, he's getting wobbled, he's getting knocked out. And I was really, again, if you've been listening to my breakdowns for a while, I was really high on Sung Woo Choi, a couple of years ago, saying that he's going to make real moves in the UFC. And honestly, back then, he was looking as sharp as a knife when it comes to the striking. He was looking like he'd got power. He was defensively aware. He could defend a takedown. He could get back up. He could really hurt his opponents with aggression and pressure. And he looked like the real deal. He really did. But then, I don't know what went wrong, but he started to get into these wars, and then suddenly he's taking damage, and then his defense isn't there, and then his durability is starting to be questioned. So when I saw Jarno Errens, I knew Jarno Errens before watching tape is more of a kickboxer. And then when I watched tape, it's just, I don't know, there's just a lot left to be desired with Jarno Errens. I think that Sung Woo Choi, he's still got to be careful. Like, Jarno Errens can knock you out. So Sung Woo Choi's got to mind his P's and Q's. He's got to not get into a war with Errens. But again, this is another thing. I don't think Errens is the type of fighter that will even accept a brawl if it's offered to him, never mind engaging in one. I do think it's going to be a more technical fight where it's not too crazy, there's not too many wild brawling exchanges. I think it'll be a more technical fight, which will suit both fighters. But in that type of fight, I still think Choi does have the slightly better quality. I think he's more dangerous than Erin's in regards to power. It's just I think that Sungwoo Choi's durability is not as great as Erin's is. So it's a real interesting fight, but like I said, I wanted to like Erin's a lot more than I did, but I have ended up with Choi. So for those reasons, I'm picking Sungwoo Choi to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of On the Money Line for UFC Singapore. Thank you for everybody tuning in, whether that's on one of our podcast platforms or whether that's on YouTube. Again, I do try and get back to all the replies and the comments on YouTube specifically, which seems to be where, people tell me where they disagree with me, tell me where they think I'm wrong, and post their own picks. And of course, most of you are betting as well, so where their bets are. And yeah, like I say, I always try and reply to the comments. So if you've got any comments, tell me where you disagree, tell me who you're picking, tell me who you're betting. If you are betting, then I hope you crush the bookies. Unless you're betting against my fighter, then of course I hope you lose. As always, I'm Newsome, and I'll see you next week.